you.
We are now live.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to our electronic committee of the whole meeting on February 9th, 2021. And thank you to those of you who've been waiting while we were in closed for your patience. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regional Council is practicing physical distancing. In an attempt to speed things up, we've assigned a mover and a seconder for all recommendations contained within the agenda package. I'll read these out at the appropriate time and then I'll state the results of the vote. Can we begin please with a roll call?
Councillor Armstrong.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Here.
Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Here.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski.
Here.
Councillor Jowett. Councillor Kiefer.
Here.
Councillor Lawrence.
Here.
Councillor McGarry.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Regional Chair Redman.
Here.
Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Strickland.
Here.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Here.
Councillor Jowett. I can see her, but I think her mic, there we are.
I'm here. Sorry, here. I don't know what's happening. I'm clicking it and it's showing, but I am here.
No problem. We have everyone present then.
All right, we need a motion to reconvene into open session. I have Councillor Verbanovic moving and Councillor Strickland seconding. Can you all use your yes and no buttons, please, to vote? And that is carried unanimously. I'm now going to ask for any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Councillor Keeper, I saw your yes button, but was that a holdover?
Yeah.
That was a holdover, sorry.
Okay, Councillor Jowett, your hand is up.
Thank you so much, Chair Clark. Just in the interest of transparency, the regional official plan is on the table again. The report is to be received for information. I want to be clear about my assumption here is that I'm just receiving a report for information and making no fiduciary duty decisions with regard to property owned.
Thank you, Councillor Jowett. I also have a statement I'd like to make on this. Item 10.1 relating to the Region of Waterloo Children's Centre Transition and System Planning. Given that I'm CEO of the YW, which is an organization that provides childcare services among other programs, and is a part of the Region of Waterloo's childcare system, I did seek the advice of the Integrity Commissioner as to whether I should declare an indirect pecuniary conflict of interest on this matter. The advice of the Integrity Commissioner was not have a conflict of interest on this item, so I will be participating in voting. All right. We are now under the consent agenda. Are there any requests to remove items from the consent agenda? Councillor Shantz?
Thank you. It doesn't have to be removed. I have a question on the Elmira treatment plant, and I noticed in one of the other reports that it referenced BioN with waste treatment. I think it was in Kitchener, and I just wondered how that fits into the other, or if it does fit into the other waste treatment plants at all.
I wonder if there's a Mr. Schmidt?
To you, Madam Chair,
Actually, I'm going to ask, is Nancy Kadusik on? She's probably better able to speak to that detail.
Through to you, Madam Chair. For the Hespeler wastewater treatment plant, we're looking at a technology that's called membrane aerated biological reactor. And it's a treatment that will improve the quality of the process and the effluent leaving the treatment plant. It is a similar technology that we're currently installing at the Hespeler wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, was it? Maybe I misread the report and I can't get my hands on it right now. But I thought there was some other bio-N kind of procedure that was happening at one of the waste treatment plants. This is it then?
Correct.
Thank you.
Right. I see no other questions or requests to remove an item. We are now going to deal with the items on the consent agenda in one motion. Moved by Councillor Erb, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Please use your yes and no buttons to vote. Okay, thank you. That is carried unanimously. All right, we're into the regular agenda. I will read the report number and ask if there are any questions before calling the vote on the reports with recommendations. The first item, 7.1, the Regional Official Plan Review Project Update, and we have a staff presentation.
Perhaps I just give a very brief introduction here. Chair Clark, this is one of a series of updates that we're presenting to Council on the ROP review process. This is a very important process, a significant conversation with the community about the future direction that we will grow in, and the policy framework that will allow us to achieve our objectives, sustainability, thriving economy, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, urban vitality, preservation of natural and agricultural resources, water resources, and so on. So Brenna's going to give us a brief overview of where we are. This is one of a series of conversations with Council over the next little while. We look forward to your support and engagement in this process as we continue through to the end of 2021. Thank you very much, and over to you, Brenna.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yep, great. And you can see the slides?
Beautiful.
Perfect, thanks. Good morning, Chair Clark and members of Regional Council. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brenna McKinnon, and I'm the project manager of the Regional Official Plan Review. And this morning, I'm going to provide you a brief update on the Regional Official Plan project. I have a tendency to speak really quickly, so if somebody wants to shout out and tell me to slow down, I'm happy to do that. There is a lot of information here to share with you, but I'm really setting the next stage for the work that you will see over the next few months. Since the review report that was provided to you in July, there's been a number of provincial changes that have had an impact on the ROP review. Number one, and importantly, the Amendment 1 to the growth plan, which put into place a few items. The first was to extend the land use planning horizon from 2041 to 2051, and with that, the release of new population forecast numbers. These population and forecast numbers to 2051 must be used by the region to plan for growth. You can see that the population forecast number is now 923,000 people. The region will also is forecasted to grow to 470,000 jobs by the year 2051. And in addition to this new horizon and population forecasts, a new land needs methodology was also issued that must be used by municipalities to assess how much additional growth is required, or how much land is required to accommodate this additional growth. So as you can see on the side there is an expected increase of 366,000 people, 142,000 new households, and 194,000 new jobs. Over the last few months, with the ROP team, we've decided to split the ROP review into two amendments. The first amendment, which will be comprised of these growth components related to the growth components of the plan, of the growth plan. And I'll just briefly review what these components are without getting into too much detail. And a number of them will have separate slides, as that is the information we will be bringing forward over in the next few months. So briefly, the regional structure is essentially a hierarchy of settlement areas where we will prioritize growth within settlement areas, and in addition, establish a hierarchy of nodes and corridors to support our transportation plan and identify where intensification should be focused. So these components, some of them exist today: the urban areas, the township urban areas, the urban designated greenfield area, and the prime industrial strategic reserve lands. Additional lands and additional elements to these components will be provided over the year, and that includes major station areas and new employment area designation. Affordable housing and housing affordability will be reviewed to ensure we plan for the right housing over the next 30 years to support housing choice, aging in place opportunities, and improved affordability. We know this is a very important issue for the community. Listening this morning to CBC, it's anticipated that the average house cost in the KW region, of course, is reaching $850,000, which makes it unaffordable for a whole lot of people. The intensification strategy in major transit station area, I will follow up in an additional slide, as well as the employment strategy and employment land conversion work, which is coming over the next few months. I did want to touch base on the land needs assessment work, which is probably the most important part of the growth component work that we're putting forward. A land needs assessment, if you don't know, is a technical study, and the methodology, as I said, was prescribed by the province recently. And that study determines how much land is needed in the region to accommodate growth. Work currently is underway on a base case scenario using those targets that were provided by the region at the end of last year, which is an intensification target of 50% and a 50% designated greenfield target of 50 people and jobs per hectare. And the base case scenario is basically the starting point for that analysis. As we move forward, 2 additional growth scenarios will be tested, which is really different intensification densities and different intensification targets and DGA densities. And these densities and targets will be evaluated, and ultimately a preferred growth scenario will be chosen. The land needs assessment also looks at the analysis of the area municipal allocation. So it is up to the region to look at that 923,000 people and allocate it appropriately to the area municipalities, as well as provide employment targets or density targets and intensification targets. And most importantly, out of all of this work, a climate action lens will be applied to all growth and as well the non-growth related work. In January, we released a climate action policy directions paper, which is now on Engage and is focused on 3 themes: how we move, how we live, and work, and how we build. And if you want to go over to the Engage website, you will see that paper as well as a survey that is very active in the community, and we're getting excellent feedback. Just briefly, background work on the non-growth component related work, which will be included in a second regional official plan amendment, has begun, and we're anticipating public consultation engagement in late fall of 2021 and winter 2022. The timeframe for bringing this amendment forward to Regional Council is the second quarter of 2022. An essential component of the ROP, of course, will be to plan for forecasted growth while maintaining existing protections such as the countryside line, the protected countryside, the regional recharge area, and the environmentally sensitive landscapes, which are of utmost importance to the community. We've heard that time and time again. The components here are, a lot of them are updates to what we currently have, as well as incorporating the provincial natural heritage system. The province has also required a water resources system, which is really looking at the hydrologic and so the surface water and the groundwater features of the region. We know that mineral aggregate policies are under scrutiny by many members of the community, as we have a number of active gravel pits. So we will be looking at updating those policies. The source water protection plan just came into force in effect in October, and our wellhead protection areas need to be updated. The province issued a agricultural system, which we also need to update and align with. And finally, as not noted in the report, but included on the presentation, is a review of the cultural heritage policies. This component was mistakenly left off the report. We know that the region has a rich and diverse history, which is important to identify and recognize and acknowledge. So ever so briefly, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking up some time here. Just wanted to review that we are looking at major transit station areas. There are 24 existing or planned MTSAs. Each MTSA has been analyzed to assess the potential capacity for growth. Regional staff have worked collaboratively with the Air Municipal staff, particularly the Air municipalities that underwent their own station planning exercise to make sure our objectives align. The major transit station areas will be delineated in the ROP, and that report and work is expected to be brought forward in April. At that time, regional staff will be looking to council to endorse 3 alternative density targets for 3 different stations. And density targets need to be reduced, as we, at this point in time, won't be able to achieve 160 people and jobs per hectare at these 3 transit station areas prior to 2051. So we will bring that forward to you in April. The next area is the draft regional employment area, which includes the requirement to designate the draft regional employment area for the region, which is something new that came out of the growth plan. With that, we are looking at an employment strategy to review vacant employment lands, key employment sectors, and non-residential development trends and labor force trends. The strategy will establish a minimum density target and identify opportunities for intensification of existing employment areas. During the past few weeks, regional staff have evaluated 56 requests for employment land conversion in collaboration with area municipal staff to ensure both regional and local context are considered. And on this map, you can see the blue dots, which are the employment conversion requests that we have been looking at. Pending the completion of the discussions with these area municipalities, as well as applicants who have requested an employment land conversion request, regional staff will be bringing forward a recommendation on the designation and recommendations on the employment land conversion requests, hopefully in March. So this is my last slide. I feel like I've obviously been talking a lot and talking too fast. The review is currently finalizing the technical background work completed under phase 2. So the years of 2019 and 2020 was a lot of background work. And we are quickly moving into phase 3, which will focus on the development of the growth scenarios, completion of the land needs assessment, and ultimately that package of work will be brought to council. by the end of June and early July for full consultation over the summer. As noted earlier, it's anticipated that the employment land conversion requests and MTSA boundaries will be coming forward in March and April. The land needs assessment for late June or early July to be followed by extensive public engagement. And of course, the intent is to bring a draft regional official plan amendment forward to council in early 2021 or late 2021 with a statutory public meeting held at the end of this year or early next year. The provincial conformity date is July 1st, 2022, and there's certainly a desire and a requirement to meet that date. So that is all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Brenda. That was a great presentation. And you didn't talk too fast. There's a lot of information to get through, but the ROP is a very dense plan. And there are several questions, starting with Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, it was an excellent presentation. As you know, at the lower tier, inclusionary zoning is vitally important, and to the region as well with respect to affordability of housing. How does that work out? How does inclusionary zoning need to be encapsulated in the ROP, or does it?
The inclusionary zoning, as you know, is in the purview of the area municipalities, but we are working very hard with the area municipalities and our housing group through Ryan and Jeff Schumacher and Judy Mann-Medema to work towards establishing an affordable housing target, which we are required to do, and then the implementation of that target through things like inclusionary zoning. I believe there was a report or a request from the City of Kitchener a few months ago to expand the ability to have inclusionary zoning outside of the major transit station areas, and the region supports that. So we'll be working with the area municipalities as they work through their process to see what the region can do to support their initiatives on inclusionary zoning.
Thank you. And that is true for the City of Waterloo from the January meeting as well. You also mentioned the March, coming back in March with respect to employment land conversions and recommendations on many dozens of sites. So I'm just wondering, what will council see then with respect? Will we see a line by line of municipal addresses, so to speak, and the lens that regional staff have taken to recommend on these, or how will that work? I'm just very keen, just because it's so many properties that
yes.
You indicated.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it is expected by March that we will have a set of prepared recommendations for which requests we are going to accept, deny, or partially approve, is what we're seeing. In late summer of last year, we drafted the draft employment strategy, as well as the mapping and a set of criteria. So if somebody was to apply, there was a set of criteria they had to base their application against. And there are a number of applicants out there who are likely going to be unhappy with staff's recommendation. And the March meeting, if it can occur once we get through some of the discussions, we expect there'll be a number of applicants coming to Regional Council to request this reconsideration of staff's recommendation. So that opportunity will be provided to them.
Yeah, thank you. I was really looking for the parameters, Ms. McKinnon. So thank you very much for your excellent answers and excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. And through the chair, Brianna, you did a great job. You were not too fast. I have to restrain myself because I'm a fast talker as well. This is basically to Michelle Sergey and Rodriguez. Back in about 2010, the North Dumfries Township handed the region to update its official plan, and we paid you to do so. At that time, you missed the Northumberland corridor as commercial industrial. And you both have agreed on this, and we've been working on it for the last 6 years. Now, can we finally be bringing this forward to fruition? Because it's been dragging on a long time. We've lost businesses that were in our core that had to expand due to productivity, that there's no land for them to be able to get to. And this was done in error. You admitted the error, and it wasn't your fault. It was other staff that were here at that time. But we all recognized the error and wanted it accomplished and rectified as quickly as possible.
Ms. Sergi?
We have, sorry, yeah.
Great. Through the chair. So this is exactly the time to be having those conversations again and to be bringing this forward. It'll be addressed through the land needs assessment work that we're going to be doing moving into May and June, and then bringing forward to council for their consideration. So it is very much being considered as part of the employment strategy in that land needs assessment.
So I'm hopeful that it'll be dealt with in 2021 and I won't have to wait another 5-6 years.
So the plan is to deal with this matter through the current regional official plan review. Yes.
Thank you.
Brandon, did you want to comment on that as well?
No, similar comments. We've been having very, very good conversations with the staff of the township and looking at this area specifically in the context of the employment strategy that we're working on. So,
thank you. Councillor Kiefer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Councillor Jaworski covered some of the things that I was going to ask, but I guess the one question that I had, and I did have a conversation with Michelle with regards to some of it, is the Ontario Realty Corporation and their involvement in the East Side lands, and what kind of an agenda or outline that they have, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Michelle was trying to get me some sort of a report on that. So that's my question. Can I get that report? Can we get that report?
Through the chair. So the Ontario Realty Corp, or the province, owns some land on the east side of Fountain Street in the East Side lands employment area. And so we have been corresponding with them to try to determine what their long-term objectives are for those lands. And unfortunately, we have not been able to get a response back, but we are continuing to try to engage with them and get some specifics on that matter. So I will continue to follow up.
Michelle, have you got any idea of how long it would take, or no?
At this point in time, no, we have started to escalate the questions.
Thank you very much.
Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. And some of my questions have been asked and answered already. My question from here is, how does the next this next review shape up compared to the last review? And I know the last review was held up for a while and it's coming here, but the predictions that were done at the last review, have they really not only shaped what we have today, but were they fairly accurate in looking at population growth as well as some of the other metrics that are sort of considered at each plan review?
So through the chair, I'm actually really happy to report that yes, the growth forecasts and the targets that were set on both the intensification and the designated greenfield area were very accurate. At the time that they were put in place, it was felt that the intensification rate was ambitious. For more than the last 10 years, we've met that 50% intensification rate. As well as we've been exceeding the population and jobs number in the designated greenfield area. So we've got a very strong foundation from which to build.
Thank you. And follow up. Oh.
Well, I was just going to add to Michelle's statement that council will recall that the last regional official plan, which was adopted by council, adopted by council in 2011, albeit formally not accepted until we went through that extensive litigation until 2015. But it did set the stage for the investment in ION, and that was a really critical set of decisions that council made. So it does illustrate how effective the regional official plan can be as a policy-making tool to help shape the future of the region.
Thank you. And if I may, as a follow-up, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate that, Mr. Greger, as we're heading into sort of more intense study and work being done on phase 2 of the ION LRT into the Cambridge area. So that's why I was really trying to ensure that we were on track in order to assist in making those business case decisions leading up to requesting for funding for some of our major transit projects. And I also just wanted to ensure at this point, and you have brought up the good point that council passed this in 2011 and it was held up. I do believe that there was some changes made to the Ontario Municipal Act in order to prevent a similar circumstance leading forward once the official plans are approved by council. Is that correct?
So this, through the chair, yes, the Planning Act was changed some time ago in order to limit the potential or prohibit appeals related to conformity matters. So going through a conformity exercise or our municipal comprehensive review, which we're referring to as the regional official plan review, is not subject to appeals to the local planning appeals tribunal.
Thank you. That gives me great reassurance. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brenna, a great presentation. Just 2 items. The first is we released the climate action discussion paper recently. I'm just wondering what the plan is. Just remind me of what the plan is for that and the input that people are providing. I noticed in the report that there's a mention of the climate action lens. So I'm wondering if you can just update us on that.
Sure. The climate action lens is a lens that we're looking at, similar to the strategic lens, is applying a climate action lens to all of the components of the plan, the growth components and the non-growth components, based on the themes that were established in that climate action policies direction paper of how we build, how we live and work, and how we move. I think those are the 3 ones. So we expect, number 1, as we are looking at, for instance, the development of growth scenario criteria and how to evaluate any potential growth scenarios, is applying a climate action lens to say, does this growth scenario look at establishing complete communities? Is it transit supportive? What potentially is the carbon footprint? Or is there a desire to establish net zero communities? So looking at each area of the plan, agriculture, transit supportive development, potentially guidelines when it comes to the type of development, transit-oriented development, heritage, all the environmental and system networks that we have as well. Stormwater management is a big issue for climate action. It will be infiltrated throughout the entire plan review. Is a good way to put it, with a heavy emphasis on resiliency and protection. So,
and does the discussion paper that we released have a due date on it in terms of public engagement?
We have it up on the Engage website until the end of the month of February. There's also a well-structured survey, as I mentioned, that, as I said, is getting a lot of uptake in the community across the board.
Okay, thanks. The other thing I wanted to ask is it's pretty clear that the conversions are going to be controversial, let's say, as you've already suggested. When that comes back to council, are you anticipating, or maybe the project team, and I'm on the project team, hasn't decided yet, whether or not that'll require a special meeting of Planning and Works, or are we going to try to put it in with a regular committee of the whole meeting? Because
through the chair, we have been working with clerks to try to determine that. In terms of the conversion requests that at a preliminary basis at this point in time are not being recommended to go forward. We're at around 15. So it's not the full 56. So take heart. So we are working with them to try to determine whether or not a separate meeting will be required. There are other options for some of these lands as well, which will be further explained going forward. So there are some policy structure elements like commercial gateway policies that seem to fit in with some of the plans for some of these conversion properties. So not all of them are just looking for residential uses to be entered in, inserted into some of the employment areas. So we are actively looking at that to try to figure out the best approach to bringing that forward to committee for your consideration.
And Michelle, are the decisions not to grant conversion, is that appealable to LPAT?
So it's all part of the package for the municipal comprehensive review. So these, as far as I understand it, are not appealable items as part of this amendment to the regional official plan. That being said, just to clarify, what we're bringing forward is really recommended regional employment lands. And the significance of that is that we need it in order to complete the employment side of the land needs assessment. So we need to understand what our supply is in order to figure out how much more land we may or may not need. So part of that is dealing with the conversions, but the conversions won't be officially approved until we've actually passed the regional official plan amendment or adopted the regional official plan amendment come late 2021 or early 2022. So there's an ample amount of opportunity for us to consider other land needs requirements as well as these lands going forward.
And do the 15 proponents who you are not likely going to recommend, are they aware of that at this point in time? I'm just wondering when we can start anticipating phone calls.
Anytime now. I would suggest that you may start getting phone calls. So we've been working actively with the area municipalities to make sure that where we can, we're aligned for the most part with respect to the recommendations on both regional employment land designation as well as the conversion requests. And from that point on, we've been meeting individually with each of the proponents regarding the lands that they've requested to be converted. As you may guess, the ones that are proceeding, usually we get an email back saying, thank you, we don't need to meet. But we've been actively meeting with those other proponents over the last 2 weeks.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you. And some of my questions were answered, and I think I answered one of my own questions. But through your presentation, I was looking at the South Woolwich area, so Breslau, the airport, and that part of it. The question that I think I answered for myself was about the area and regional employment lands, and the pink on the map is regional employment areas, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So, so that question is taken care of. When you went over transit and major transit areas, that was strictly LRT, and I just wonder about the GO station law, or that kind of transit is being included or not included, or how are you dealing with that as part of the ROP?
So through the chair, so we are planning for sort of that interregional transit as part of the ROP. The GO station in Breslau isn't considered a major transit station area under the growth plan, but there will be planning surrounding that specific location as well.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is sort of related, and that is, can you just talk a little bit to how you are considering the townships and the, how we fit into the regional plan, different from the cities, and how we also need, Sue talked about some employment lands in North Dumfries, and so we do have some growth going on, but the nature of our settlements and our towns is different. So how do you put that all together when you're working on it?
So through the chair, so we do have an area municipal working group that we meet with on a regular basis. So it includes all of the area municipalities. We have been meeting individually with each of the area municipalities, both cities and townships. And the townships have been pretty forthright about what their considerations are with respect to growth. And so those are all being considered as part of the mix. With the last regional official plan, the targets that we set with respect to intensification and densities in the designated greenfield area are across the region as a whole. So when we do the area municipal allocations for population and employment, we also consider variations within that intensification rate and the densities in the designated greenfield areas in order to accommodate the different levels of growth and the character, the specific character of the townships and the township urban areas as we go through the review and the allocations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so lastly, I'm going to put another plug in for a bypass for Elmira. We've had lots of talks with our BIA, and so I'll just leave that there. Thank you.
And just to comment back that township staff have been great at providing us with the information associated with that area. So thank you.
I did have one question, and I'm wondering, when we do our population targets, do we also, or projections, I should say, do we also do income projections? And the reason I'm asking is I'm wondering how we came up with a 30% target for affordable housing for low to moderate income households. Does that 30% correspond with something in our projections?
Through the chair, the definition of affordable housing is actually provided by the province. And so we're required to deal with that sort of definition and accommodate that. So the target for affordable housing out of the housing and homelessness plan is 25%. We're going to incorporate that into the regional official plan. That's a requirement in the growth plan. So just to clarify those percentages. So we don't necessarily do an income specific or put an income specific lens on the population forecast. The forecasts are given to us by the province. But through our work with housing, we do look at that from an affordability lens. So we do consider income in that case.
So if we don't use projections, how does that correspond to income levels currently? Would we say currently we have 25 to 30% of households in the low to moderate income? That seems low to me.
So what I'm going to suggest on this is that I'm going to follow up with our housing staff counterparts, and perhaps this is a question that we can get back to you and committee on in the future, if that's okay with you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I see no other questions. This was an information item, so there is no motion. Thank you again to staff. Moving on to the next item, 7.2, direction to proceed with the declaration of surplus lands. 34 Peel Street, New Hamburg, and 41 Westhill Drive in Waterloo. I don't believe we have a presentation on this. The information is in the reports. Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you through the chair to staff on this one. I did notice that the of the two sites, certainly Westhill Drive is residential. I think the other site in New Hamburg appears more commercial. I noticed that it's to sell at fair market value. However, as you know, there's certainly values of the strategic plan that the region has set with respect to affordable housing. And I just want to make sure that those values would be taken into account when reviewing the bids, so to speak, rather than just top bidder, because I don't think top bidder is particularly what regional councils look. We're looking for a very creative acquirer of these lands on Westhill Drive.
Mr. Gear?
Yes, through you, Chair Clark. Certainly, we will be bringing forward a report, a subsequent report on the 41 Westhill Drive property, and seeking direction from council on the process there. And we're very keenly aware that this is a good candidate property for affordable housing. So we will want to make sure that we have incorporated a process that can accommodate that is a scenario. So stay tuned for a future report on that matter.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rod.
Councillor Galloway?
Well, that's pretty well what I was going to ask as well. It seems like a great candidate site for to RFP on after we've declared it surplus. Thanks.
Councillor Erb?
Councillor Jaworski asked my question. Thank you.
All right. I see no other questions. The recommendation, I'm getting little chimes. Is anyone else hearing that? All right. I don't think I'm the host of this meeting. I hope I'm not. I'm not sure I have the technical capacity to do that. Oh, Councillor Strickland?
I was just voting, Madam Chair.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Lorenz, are you voting or do you have a question?
No, yeah, well, just a comment. And I think when your email comes in, if you get an email, it might ding, it does on my desktop. So that
could be it.
And so the new Hamburg site, that is just, how are we disposing of that? Is it going in as a, we're hiring, do we have someone that does our land disposition, or do we get a realtor to do that? How does that work?
Through you, Chair Clark, I'll ask, I think Tom Penwarden is on the call with regard to this matter, or Deborah is here, I see, for sure.
Yes, I don't know if Mr. Penwarden wants to elaborate, but the understanding would be that we would be listing it with a realtor on the open market for sale at the highest price. The property is small and has some limitations related to its floodplain status, but we'd be looking for the highest market value on the sale.
So do we have a list of realtors that we rotate through that, or do we, how does that work? I guess that's my question.
Yeah. So pursuant to the purchasing bylaw, we take a look at the, the approximate value in terms of the commission, and then the purchasing bylaw dictates how we select the realtor to list a property for sale. So depending upon the value, it may involve getting 3 quotes, which would involve, obtaining the best quote on the, for example, the lowest commission price on it. But essentially it's governed, we follow the practices of the purchasing bylaw to ensure, fairness and transparency.
Right. Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you.
All right, I have no other questions. The recommendations in your report, moved by Councillor Galloway and seconded by Councillor Foxton. Would you please use your yes or no buttons to vote? And that is carried unanimously. All right. Item 8.2, comments on the Environmental Registry. Proposed implementation of provisions in the Planning Act that provide the Minister enhanced authority to address certain matters of a zoning order. We do not have a presentation on this. Are there any questions or comments? Ms. Sergi, did you want to speak?
Sure, just by way of update to the report. Recently on the Environmental Registry, the Minister consulted on a new provision in the Planning Act that they had with respect to the Minister's zoning orders and site plan approval. They also asked sort of where in principle they should be utilizing Minister's zoning orders, and so that is the subject of the report. Primarily, what we're suggesting is that while an MZO is a legitimate planning tool under the Planning Act, and there may be points in time where staff are coming forward and recommending Minister's zoning order, but the staff position is really that it should be the exception and not necessarily the rule, that there should be a greater public interest associated with it, because with a Minister's zoning order, it allows effectively to get around all of the public consultation and input. And so in order for that to occur, we really truly believe that it should be a sort of greater public interest, be it a housing or a large-scale employer, or something that something of urgency that would require that type of tool to be used. The only other thing that we've recommended for clarity is that the Minister has consisted that they are seeking municipal input on any Minister zoning order, as long as it's not provincially owned land. And we've recommended that they consider both the area municipality and the regional municipal considerations when looking at MZOs in the future.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. Just a comment when reading through this. Once again, this is the province saying that they have basically final say in what we do. This is similar to what happened with the Conservation Authority Act, and it is a concern for us all. If a business doesn't like how we're doing business and they want to do things a certain way, they can go to the province, and we will be trying to fight with the province, but they've taken our power away. This is a frightening thing that I see happening more and more. I'm very, very concerned of the ability of the province to step in and warrantly do things without justification, without public consultation, and without input from the municipalities.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Chair. And through your, I do have some concerns as well as, knowing that there's been more MZ orders signed over the last few months and has been in years, although Cambridge is subject to one of them. And I think it was an appropriate MZ order that was enacted on the Smart Centers property right at Highway 401 and 24. Again, there is no environmental issues. There was no other areas, and it's certainly a key redevelopment for mixed use and housing as well as commercial. So I didn't necessarily have any issues, and my council did endorse the plan. And therein lies my question. Currently, the minister prefers to have council endorsement over an MZ order that he may be enacting at this point. Is there any clarity or any comment about what happens in a situation where an MZ order is proposed, the council does not endorse it? Then what does the ministry do? Will they go ahead with that plan, or indication that they will concur with the approval or disapproval of the municipal council? That's really my question.
Through the chair, there is no requirement in the Planning Act for the minister to consider the opinion of municipalities in making his or her decision related to a minister's zoning order. Publicly, they have said that they are looking for a positive municipal endorsement of an MZO, but there's no requirement under the Planning Act.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jawad, I think I did see your hand, but now I don't. You're good? Okay. All right, I see no other questions. The recommendation is in the report, and I think that Ms. Sergi did a good job of summarizing it. Sorry, I just need to find my moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Harris. Please use your yes or no buttons to vote. And I see that is passed, carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item 8.1, the King Victoria Transit Hub Design Development and Funding Update. And we do have a staff presentation on this one. And I see Mr. Dyer has appeared.
I have. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I'll just take a moment here to share my screen. And I trust you can both see that slide and hear my voice.
Both.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you, Madam Chair. We put a brief slide deck together, basically just to walk committee through the recommendations and the key considerations set out in this report. And the recommendations, as you've seen, are first of all, to make a request of the Minister of Transportation to extend the time frame of the King Victoria Transit Hub Transfer Payment Agreement. Regardless of how this plays out, we are going to need some additional time relative to what's currently in the agreement. The next two recommendations are related. The first would be to direct staff to submit an application to the Investing in Infrastructure Canada transit stream for an estimated $73 million in incremental costs. And I'll show you the numbers in a minute, but this is a key point. Recall that the transfer payment agreement that we have right now is for $33 million of 100% funding for regional infrastructure. And what we're recommending is that we submit an application for the costs over and above that $33 million. And subject to the approval of such an application, then we would allocate $53.4 million, being coincidentally 73% of the $73.1 million. And then an additional recommendation to continue work that's already underway, which is to explore additional funding sources, including development charges and potentially contributions from other potential partners, including Via Rail and the FCM Municipal Fund. And so the key considerations that, like the key points that we've set out in the report is that the revised cost estimate is currently sitting at $106.1 million. So we've gone through a couple of more iterations of design, made at least a preliminary determination of what's in scope and what's out of scope. And the cost has come out to be an estimated $106 million, which again is $73 million higher than what's in the TPA. We have been attempting for some time to secure additional 100% funding from the province. Those results have not been successful, and that has caused us to reconsider our funding strategy and look to see if there's a different way that we can make this project happen and find the funding for that additional cost. So, and I think as committee is aware, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, significant program announced a few years ago, funds 73% of eligible project expenditures. And that's 40% from the federal government and 33% from the province. And then the other 27% we would have to find through other sources. And so our point here really, we could access $53 million in existing IKIP subsidy for the KBTH. We're not asking for any more money. We don't need a new program to be put in place. We're working within the confines of the existing funding allocation that has been provided to the region of Waterloo. And at this point, we have $212 million in funding capacity that is still not been approved. So how do these numbers work? We tried to find, a clear way of describing this, and I'm going to work from the bottom line up. So the total program, as announced a couple of years ago, is a $467 million program over, I'm going to say, about 8 or 9 years. And working from left to right, $187 million from the federal government, $156 million from the province, and $125 million from the municipality. 40%, 33%, 27%. So that's the program in its totality. And the top line, you can see what's been approved. And you may recall we submitted applications for, let's say, 15 or 16 different projects, most significant being the Northfield Drive Maintenance and Operations Facility. It's currently under construction. We've received federal and provincial approval for those projects, which total about $177 million in total project costs. We have one project that's still under review. And so what's remaining is about $212 million in subsidy, representing $289 million in spending. And really what we're saying is, let's access that uncommitted, unapproved existing IKIP subsidy in order to deal with the increased costs relating to the transit hub. So what we would do sorry, I'll backtrack for a second here. In our capital program, in the transit capital program, we have notionally allocated that 212 million. So if you look at the first column here, this is the approved, what we have in the approved transit 10-year capital program. And so we've looked at projects that we believe would be eligible, would meet the eligibility requirements under this program. And we've allocated that 212 million. And this goes into the 7th, even 8th year of the capital program. If the recommendation was approved, essentially what we would be doing is notionally moving money out of projects that are further out in the capital program and using that IKIP allocation to fund 73% of the additional King Victoria Transit Hub costs. So right now, projects that are out in the mid or latter part of the capital program, we would replace with the King Victoria Transit Hub and access that IKIP money sooner than we otherwise would. The other reason why we think this is a good strategy is we understand that there is a very high potential for some new federal funding. We copied here some language that came out of the fall economic statement back in November from the federal government, which speaks to a long-term permanent public transit funding program that will help to electrify public transit systems. So where we've taken some money out of certain projects that are further out in the capital program, these are projects that relate to the electrification of transit. And so I think we have an opportunity here to use more IKIP funding sooner for the King Victoria Transit Hub and use the new federal program to fund electric buses and LRVs later on in our capital program. And, you know, we should get some indication of what this federal program will look like when the federal budget comes out later this spring. And so, you know, we wrestled a little bit with the best approach to move forward with. You know, obviously, from a financial perspective, it's not as good as having 100% provincial funding for the whole project. But overall, we would say this is a good financial outcome. We would have $33 million of 100% funding and then 73% of the additional $73 million in costs funded by the federal and provincial governments. We don't need a new program. We don't need new money announced. We're just working within the existing program. We keep the TPA intact, although we do know an extension would be needed. And importantly, we think it would allow the project to proceed sooner and would allow us to access more IKIP funding sooner than later, where we have it in the capital program right now. On the disadvantages side, we're aware that the region needs to come up with the other 27% of the incremental costs, but still on a $100 million project to come up with $19 million, that I think is a pretty good financial income. Outcome. It does require some work with the province in terms of dealing with some language in the existing TPA. We've started those conversations with staff at the MTO. We have asked for the second IKIP intake window to be opened expeditiously. There is no mechanism right now to submit an application. They do need to open that window. And we acknowledge that we'll have to reassess future transit projects that are further out in our capital program for possible IKIP funding or for funding through another program. So our key messages to you today, I think the first one is really key. We're working within our existing IKIP allocation. This is not a request for additional funding. This is a request to approve an application for existing funding. We get to access IKIP money sooner rather than later. And as I mentioned, we're expecting new funding in the form of an electrification of public transit system program. So you could consider this, you know, this step is really interim. And once we get the details on the federal program, we come back with a revised funding strategy, if you will, for the overall GRT capital program. So, Madam Chair, those are my slides. I hope that's been helpful to walk you through the report, and we have myself and other staff available to answer any questions that you might have.
And not surprisingly, there are a lot of questions. I apologize if I'm not asking them in the right order, because for some reason my screen isn't organizing them and some are popping up simultaneously, but I think Councillor Foxton was first.
Thank you, and through the chair. Craig, and position to put forward. What concerns me? Potential for new funding federally. I think because it's an election, you're going to see money throwing out right, left, and center in potential funding, and it's all based upon an election, which I've learned in politics a long, long time ago, do not count on anything that's said before an election. And an example was that the township was supposed to get quite a bit of money before the last provincial election and end up with none of it. And your comments like believe would be, and allocated if approved and unapproved, or uncommitted and unapproved. I have real concerns about this. This is saying, we want to go ahead with this project, let's do this project and hope for the best down the road, which means this project could end up on the backs of the taxpayer. And I have real concerns about that. I'm not saying no, maybe I'm missing something that someone can explain to me, but I'm very concerned about this.
I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but I could make a comment on it. And Councillor Foxton, I think as staff we share that concern and are always grappling with the potential for a change in government and what that might mean for various programs. I'll just give this a try. I think with this, I think one of the benefits actually of what we're recommending is it would get a commitment for the KVTH project in place, and in place quickly. And I think, once we have a revised transfer payment agreement in place for the project, I think it's unlikely then that a future government would unwind it. It might affect future project approvals, but the advantage here is that in theory, we would get this project nailed down and funded in the next few months and avoid that risk. But we acknowledge the concern that you've expressed.
Is this not a similar situation with the LRT where we were hoping for funding that we never got, or additional funding that we never got?
I'm not sure if it's a similar problem. I would say that overall, certainly from a stage one perspective, I think we received the provincial and federal funding that we were expecting. And you may recall, Foxton, that we were able to negotiate an additional $25 million in provincial funding back in late 2017. So I don't see it quite as the same kind of issue as LRT.
Councillor Foxton?
I was just going to say thank you, and you're correct. We did receive additional funding, but it wasn't funded the way Hamilton's was, if I'm correct in that.
You are absolutely correct in that.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Clark. And so I'm kind of thinking similar along the lines of, that's a fairly significant increase in costs, Craig, and I can see that you've been doing some incredible maneuvers to try and find our way through fairly significant investment numbers here. And I guess I just want to know, is there anything here that could potentially, and maybe you can't, maybe your crystal ball's not working, mine isn't, but is there a way of looking at this and saying there's what the vulnerability to LRT2 is? I mean, we've come so far and we've become so engaging with the community. I'd be really concerned if if that LRT2 after all of this gets any kind of deflation.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I would suggest that the two are unrelated, and I say that because really what we're doing is applying for a project within an existing program. So we could be talking about any project, right? We're not going to the federal and provincial government saying we need more money. All we're saying is allow us to use the existing money that you've announced to complete the project. And further to that, I would say that the overall order of magnitude of the LRT Phase 2 project is materially of the overall funding that's available under the IKIP program. You know, we put another way, we would never make an IKIP application for LRT Stage 2. There's simply not enough funding in the program. It's a separate process, a separate approval at a very different order of magnitude.
And so I understand that part of it. I just think generally when they're doling out cash, they might not itemize quite, so succinctly with all of the different acronyms or all of the different buckets of funding, if you will. They when they're starting to dole out those kinds of funds, they have to consider other communities, and so I guess that's sort of where my trepidation lies, Craig. That's all that is. And I'm wondering, because you work with these bureaucrats, if you have a sense of any of that, being something that could be under consideration.
I don't think we've received any sense that that the request that we're proposing to make through this report, has any implications on other projects, other initiatives that are happening. That certainly hasn't been expressed to us at a staff level.
And you're kind of trying to keep an eye on it. You're got some spidey sense going on when you're in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Craig. Much.
Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Craig, excellent presentation, and I want to thank you and staff for the great work that you've been doing on this for some time, as well as looking at different funding possibilities. I did note in your presentation the notion of looking at non-federal specific funding, so things like the Federation of Canadian Municipality Green Municipal Fund, looking at Via Rail and so on. I wonder, do we know, are there any examples across North America, I guess in particular, where some of these major transit hubs actually maybe even have a naming opportunity attached to them? I mean, is there a potential funding source there? We'd have to debate if that's something we wanted to pursue, but is that something that's been looked at elsewhere?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not familiar with any specific examples, but it's certainly not something that I personally haven't looked into at this point. It's something that we can certainly add to our list, as we work through our due diligence in pursuing other sources of funding, and see if that's an opportunity. I'm not familiar with any, but it doesn't mean they're not out there.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be worthwhile at least thinking about it and seeing if there is some opportunity there. I'm really encouraged by your comments and focus on the federal budget and so on. I can share with colleagues that, I mean, the FCM approach this spring is very much not just with the governing party, but with all of the parties, but focusing on a big part of the focus going into a potential election will be around the permanent transit fund, continued COVID-19 supports and looking at economic stimulus coming out of COVID. But on the transit end of things, as you've noted, a permanent transit fund really speaks to where Councillor Jowett's concerns were, because it's really designed to assist with expanding transit systems, whereas the separate funds that have been notionally talked about and advocated for have been more focused around the role that electric vehicles can help with in terms of seeing the federal government achieve our Paris Agreement objectives quicker, and using that as a sort of separate stream for post-COVID stimulus investments. So I think we're well positioned with our strategy to actually be ahead of the curve in our thinking and ready to respond quickly if and when these programs become available, and hopefully they won't be a priority of just the government, but if Canadians decide that there's a change in government in the offing, that it'll be a priority of all four political parties.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Well, I have some similar concerns, Mr. Dyer. Thanks for the strategy, and I think it's a good strategy. I have similar concerns as Councillor Jowett with regards to the LRT Phase 2 for Cambridge. And I hear what Mr. Dyer you're saying in terms of it's a separate issue in terms of the funding and process. But I can't help but think and worry that all this it will do is further down the road, put the project further down the road than it already is. I mean, we've secured, as far as I know, no funding yet from either government, provincial or federal, on the Phase 2, and that's yet to come. And like Councillor Jowett, I think that the concern is that they will say, well, we've dedicated so much money to the region of Waterloo on transportation already. We're not gonna put as much in it. That type of thinking. I know it's hypothetical, but it's a worry, and of course we in Cambridge would like to see the LRT sooner than later, because of all the benefits that the rest of the region has gotten because of it. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, Mr. Dyer, but that's how I feel. I'm concerned about the timing of this.
Thank you, Councillor Kiefer, and through you, Chair Clark. I think, I think my comment would be along the lines of, I'm not sure that it matters which project we're talking about right now. Let me try to explain that a little better. The province will, generally speaking, be inclined to approve a project that meets the requirements within the IKIP program. So whether we're talking about the King Victoria Transit Hub or a transit facility located somewhere else, or buses or other related infrastructure, again, because we're working within the existing parameters of a program, we can't and shouldn't see similar manner as asking for more money. This is not a request for more money. This is simply a request to approve an application within an existing program. The LRT Stage 2 is a request for additional funding, and we need a different, separate strategy in place in order to move that request forward. I'm not sure if that helps.
Well, thanks for the reply and the answer. I'm not sure it helps my thinking on it either, because I just worry about the timing for the Phase 2, in terms of getting it sooner than later. But thanks for the explanation.
Councillor Shantz. Sandy, you're muted.
Thank you. I thought I unmuted. Through you, Chair Clark, to get sort of a general comment, I guess. I understand the rationale that you're using, Mr. Dyer, and it makes some sense to me. I guess my comment is more in relation to the townships and the projects, and what I'd like to take take this opportunity to talk about a little bit is connecting the settlements with each other, the towns with each other, and with the cities. And I know all of the township mayors have concerns about how we do that and how we go about that. So as I look at this plan, it strikes me that it's very city-centric, as it should be. So I totally get that. But I do think that we need to start talking and continue talking about how we can be creative in connecting some of our towns and connecting our towns to the cities. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to point out that we need to start balancing that out. And LRT2 is going ahead, and we've sort of sat back and waited so that the cities could get that sorted out. But we really do need to continue those talks and be a little more serious about them. Thanks.
Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I just wanted to weigh in. Just those around the horseshoe may remember that when Phase 1 LRT was being funded, at that time, the provincial program, or the program that we applied for funding on, was a third, a third, a third. And certainly the province moved in most recent years to looking at funding 100% of LRT or major transit projects such as Hamilton, and I think Brampton was offered the same and deferred it. And so while the LRT was underway, Phase 1 in Waterloo Region, Waterloo Region came back to the province to see if there was more funding that could
Catherine, I think you're frozen.
That was happening to her yesterday too.
Investment in broadband.
Do you want to go on to Councillor Galloway's question while Catherine reconnects?
Is that what you want to do, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I was hoping Catherine could hear this as well. I understand the angst that some people may have, but I really do want to emphasize the project team for the KBTH, which a number of us are on, certainly anticipated this concern. And I just want to emphasize that this is a completely different program as has been told to us. The money that that's being recommended today is money that is already in our envelope, so to speak. It's never going to get spent on an LRT system. It's going to get spent on electric buses and other things that you saw on that list. And we're just suggesting that we reallocate the money to this particular project. When it comes time to make an application, when we do have a project for Stage 2, and certainly I've been pushing for the Stage 2 project for a long time, that'll be part of a different project, a different funding process. And it's what we do with our IKIP funding, which we've already been given, is just a kind of an internal decision of how we are going to expend it. There's no opportunity to spend that money on an LRT system, nor is it going to impinge on any future decisions, because this money has already been allocated to the region, whether we spend it on this or electric buses or other things such as, you know, like we're doing with the Northfield maintenance facility. So I understand the concern, but I don't see this in any way slowing down, diminishing, lessening the opportunity we have for funding for stage 2. If in fact it did, I certainly wouldn't be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway. I think that Councillor McGarry may have rejoined us by phone. Is she present?
And I'm present on the screen. Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Can I
Go ahead.
just state I can't be more frustrated with this. Every time I speak, it goes off. So I've got my phone there in case I go off this time. I don't know what you heard last time, so I'm going to start again. If that's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to just state historically that this council will recall that with the original funding of Phase 1 LRT in Waterloo region, at that time, the provincial and the federal program was a third. And partway through the Phase 1 installation and construction, the provincial program switched to a 100% funding for some of the LRT projects around the province, including Hamilton, Brampton at the time, and they ended up giving that back. So during that time, there were conversations had with this region, with the province, in order to obtain more provincial funding, because at that point, Phase 1 certainly cost more over the time period. And so some of that came forward. But part of the discussions was, how do we make up for the fact that our region has paid more into the LRT than other municipalities that came later. And part of those discussions was on the King Street Victoria Station allocation. And I did go to bat in my former role for this particular project. So I can understand why at that time the costs were seen as what they were, and that they've gone up since then. So it does concern me more than a little bit that the cost right now almost sounds like it's going to rob Peter to pay Paul. I would be concerned at the moment that Phase 2 LRT to Cambridge might be jeopardized for funding because it's gone to pay for the extra costs of the King Street Victoria Station. And in fact, I would agree and concur with my Cambridge colleagues that will be a concern in our future. I understand that this is just an application for certain funding for this area, but I would be concerned that Cambridge residents will feel that the Phase 2 LRT may never come because that has been used in another project. So just a word of caution. I'm not sure that I would be supportive of an either or. I know that's not the decision in front of us. I know it's just an application, but my grave concern is if we borrow from the future and now LRT Phase 2 is ready to go and that money's no longer there, and the provincial government has changed the program for higher order transit again, because it does happen between projects, well aware of that. I'm just really concerned that we don't have enough insurance in Cambridge that Phase 2 LRT will have the money in the cookie jar when we go to pick it up in order to pay for this. And as I said, I know that it's confusing in order to try and collect the funding from all the sources that may be out there, and that when governments change or government programs change, you have to adjust. This region's been excellent at making sure that we've gotten what we needed to finish some of these stations. So just concerned about this particular project and the cost overruns from its initial concept, and the fact that I'm just not feeling very confident that we're going to have what we need in Phase 2. So long drawn out explanation. I know I'm probably closer to it than most, but very concerned that we have the funding that we need for all of our higher order transit in the future.
Councillor McGarry, were you able to hear Councillor Galloway's comments while you were reconnecting?
No, I wasn't.
Councillor Galloway, do you want to repeat?
Well, yeah, I'd hope you would hear. Can I assure you that if I felt in any way that LRT Stage 2 is going to be jeopardized by this decision, I wouldn't be supporting it. This money, the IKIP money, will never, ever, ever get used for LRT Stage 2. And it's money that's already been given to us to almost do with what we wish, but certainly not to extend an LRT system. There's parameters. So, you know, nobody objected to the $100 and some million in the Northfield station that came out of this fund, that it would diminish our opportunity on Stage 2, nor all the other things. So it's just a rejigging of the money that has already been given to us. It's kind of sitting in a bank account, but not yet released. Stage 2, and any decision we make today on any of our IKIP projects, whether they're ones that we currently have on the books or ones that we would consider in the future, will have no effect on a future decision of a senior level of government for our Stage 2 project, which of course I desperately would like to see us move forward on. So again, I understand the concern. I anticipated the concern, but really and truly, I would not be supporting this if I felt in any way that it diminished our opportunity for Stage 2. That will come from a completely separate process. It sounds positive, in fact, what Craig has said in terms of what might come out of a spring budget for a new infrastructure program, and I think is very indicated as well, the electrification of transit. What else? I mean, LRT is a great prospect for that particular program, and I think we might be hitting it right. But to not approve this plan is only to really say we're going to spend the money on other things, such as the electric buses, or we're building a bridge over the expressway. We're doing a variety of things around the entire region with our IKIP money. And I just don't appreciate the angst, and I certainly don't want the message being in Cambridge that this money is kind of being taken away from Stage 2. That's just simply not the case at all. But you know, I appreciate people's concern. But anyway, that's I certainly will be supporting the decision. It just seems like an excellent opportunity to use the allocation that we have from the IKIP program.
Mr. Lobner.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor McGarry also mentioned a concern that some have about the costs almost tripling. And staff have been able to clarify that, in fact, there have been some inflationary costs, but a big portion of this was going to be paid for by a consortium in our initial thinking. So we're paying for the whole thing from various levels of government. So I want to be clear that this isn't the case that the costs have gone up that much. It's the fact that we are taking on something that would have been previously paid, a significant portion, previously paid for by a consortium had they been able to step up for this. And that option is not available now.
Chair.
Chair Clark, did you say me?
Yes, sorry.
All right, I got it. I would just want to agree with everyone that's talked about how important the messaging is, because I think it's absolutely incumbent on us to be as clear as we can with everybody in Waterloo region. Yesterday, I started out with some of the people on this call providing a pre-budget consultation to the federal government. I ended my day off with providing pre-budget consultation to the provincial government. Projects like LRT, projects like this Victoria King Transit Hub absolutely demand participation of senior levels of government. And Councillor Foxton, you're exactly right. The rules have changed because we were an early adopter. But I would have to tell you, there's lots of challenges still ahead of the King Victoria Transit Hub. But one of the reasons why it is so key to investment is because at both of those pre-budget consultations, I talked about all-day two-way go. I talked about the Breslau GO station. I talked about partnerships with Metrolinx, which is all part of this project and some of the costs of this project. All of this fits in with the bigger vision that we have for the future of Waterloo region. So it is hugely important for our economic future that we're able to connect up with that two-way all-day go with faster, more frequent train service, with options for people at the Breslau GO station. So I don't know if Mr. Regier is on the call and he wants to talk about the fact that this is pivotal and this is important, but there's still lots of wrinkles and risks that we have in moving forward with this. This just is a very thoughtful plan that staff have come up with in consultation with other players in other levels of government as well as private sector to say, how can we get this investment locked down and this connection made?
Mr. Regier?
Well, through you, Chair Clark, in response to Chair Redmond's comments, certainly we are thinking seriously about this as a fully integrated system, and Phase 2 ION is an absolutely critical part of it because it will connect the entire city of Cambridge by higher order transit to the rest of the region. But not only that, we are in the final stages of a feasibility study for a Metrolinx connection to Cambridge into the Pine Bush station connecting to the ION Phase 2. So the concept of a multimodal station in Cambridge, which would also connect into the Metrolinx system, is very much in the planning process right now. We obviously would need to get Phase 2 ION funded and underway in order to accomplish that kind of connection. But it's not difficult to imagine where a multimodal station in Cambridge would be located. So, I think connecting the Breslau station to Cambridge, connecting the future ION station at Pine Bush to the GO system, these are all that are in play right now.
Councillor Jowett?
Chair Clark, and Rod, thank you. Thanks for really trying to bring in the big picture here, because I think we all really need to understand it. So just to try and deal with some of my colleagues in Cambridge and our concerns, what kind of timeline, if everything went according to plan, would you suggest the Pine Bush station would happen? And how much money would we need at that time? And the reason I ask this is I'm looking at strategy a little different. Like, I'm looking at if there's ICIP money there, why are we not being strategic in positioning a station in Cambridge to demonstrate to the province and the feds we're serious? We're serious about LRT2, and we're actually positioning to be able to accept LRT2. And so I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I'm asking the bigger question intentionally, so that we can respond to constituents. I mean, it took us a while to get people on board here, and we have to keep trying to get people on board. But I don't want to live in a roller coaster world of this with our constituents either. So, if you can help me with the multimodal station in Pine Bush that you're envisioning here, and I know that you're realistic about these expectations. I've had enough conversations with you to know that this is not just fodder. So when would that be? How much would it be? And is there any conceivable way that we could start to set the ground now to prove to the province and the feds that this is our intent?
Mr. Regier, do you want to field that?
I'd actually prefer to bounce it over to my colleague Thomas Schmidt, but I would say that just by preamble that the design work and the environmental assessment for Phase 2 ION is in its final stages, as you know, Councillor Jowett, and the work on the feasibility study for the Fergus subdivision from Cambridge to Guelph is also in its final stage. That we have not yet concluded those analysis or that particular piece of work yet. Although I know that Thomas's team is engaged on it. So I think it's a little bit premature. There are some assumptions about ION Phase 2 in terms of the capital program and some funding and development construction forecast, but I think they're really all 100% contingent upon making an argument or getting a successful funding agreement with the federal and provincial governments. Thomas, I don't know if you want to dodge in here.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the only thing I would add is that there is ongoing work looking at the connections from Guelph to Cambridge, and I believe we're close to having that done, basically confirming that is feasible. But we have not, and we've had discussions with the province on the ION Stage 2, and as part of that, we have always confirmed that it is our intent to look at some type of a multimodal hub in the Pine Bush area with the connection to Guelph and two-way all-day Go. So they're aware of that, but I think it is a little bit premature. We are scheduled to have ION Stage 2 EA complete by June of this year. And then subsequent to that, we would be submitting a business case to the province and federal governments. And that's really then the kickoff of looking at funding for ION Stage 2 with, as it was for Stage 1, some discussion on a multimodal hub happening at the same time.
And so, Thomas, just to clarify, how soon after LRT gets approved would you consider an investment in a Pine Bush multimodal? And in today's dollars, what kind of costing would be realistic to assume here?
We really have not done any of that work at all. I mean, to be fair, we have discussed that possibility. It's first of all dependent on making sure we get the connection to Cambridge from Guelph. I mean, that's the first step that we're working on right now. Second step is then looking at the exact location and then what form and shape that facility takes, which will then drive the cost. So we're really, I mean, it's a good question. It's good thought. It's there, but we're just not at the point yet to answer those questions. But probably in the next 2 or 3 years, we would be.
And so if you had to project, would it be 75% or 50% consideration of the Victoria King Transit Hub? Or in your imagination, I'm not asking for commitment, I'm just trying to understand the intent here.
I think the intent is to provide a good facility that meets the needs of the customers and of Cambridge there. It really depends on what form and shape that facility takes. So that decision hasn't been made and there hasn't been any discussion on that at this point. And that will be discussion just as with the King Victoria, that will include council and councillors, and there'll be a project team and they will look at all the options, determine what is the best facility to construct and what the cost of that would be.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. And through the chair to Craig Dyer. Craig, now I'm going to pick your brain. So the money is committed, but we don't have it. Could you just nod yes or no?
The money is committed and we currently don't have it. We have 16 projects that have been approved and we make claims to the province as costs are incurred and they reimburse us the 73%. But as I showed on my earlier slide, we have a big block of funding that is currently uncommitted.
Okay, so, but we did apply it to specific projects. So do we have to go back to the upper levels of government to say that that funding we now want to channel into this instead of on the projects that you originally allocated them for?
We do not. And we do not because, we've made that allocation in our capital program, but we have yet to make a specific application to the province. So what the province will look at are the projects that we apply for.
Okay, so these allocations date out a number of years, is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The allocations. So there's several projects that the money's been allocated for, but it dates out a number of years.
It goes out a number of years, yes. If you look at our GRT capital program, you'll see IKIP funding, on an annual basis, probably going out 7 or 8 years into our capital program right now.
Okay, so we're going to pick money that's allocated out for 7 or 8 years. So we really can't guarantee that's going to happen because that's commitments from a different level of government. Is there any guarantee on that money?
I try not to offer guarantees. That being said, I would say, leaving aside the risk of a future government changing the program, it's a very high likelihood, right? We know and understand what the eligibility requirements are for IKIP. And we have been deliberately and quite intentionally picked projects that we believe have an extremely high likelihood of being approved by the province.
So is it like the gas tax or something like that?
Sorry?
Is it like the gas tax, which is like a 99% guarantee?
Yeah, it's not quite as, it's a little more bureaucratic, if you will, than gas tax. So the beauty of the federal gas tax program is we know what the eligibility criteria are. We go and do the projects. It's not an individual application and approval process. The difference with IKIP is we have to get federal and provincial approval on a project-specific basis, and we need that approval in place before we start to incur costs. That's the difference.
That's a little more frightening for me because we don't have their approval for this. We have approval for the basic criteria that it falls under, but we don't have unless this falls under that criteria. And does this fall under that criteria?
Yeah, so we believe that the King Victoria Transit Hub meets the criteria set out in the transfer payment agreement for IKIP. So we just need to go through the application process with the ministry, and the way it works is we make the application to the MTO staff review it, we go back and forth as often as we need to, and then the province, they nominate it to the federal government. And then we wait for the federal government to approve it, and once that is done, and we have the letters from the 2 orders of government, then we can incur costs. And so that's why the recommendation is before you today. We want council's direction to go ahead and submit an application. We'd like to get through that application process as expeditiously as possible so that we can move the project forward, which means instructing our design team complete the working drawings and the tender specs and get a tender out on the street.
Okay, I'm more comfortable with that because it's not a total commitment right now. And saying if the federal or provincial doesn't back us up, then we have to commit on the taxpayers. So I'm more comfortable with that than the other situation. And based upon that alone and the non-commitment of the taxpayer at this time, I'm comfortable about supporting this. So that's a little more clear because I thought we were going to run ahead and if the and start the process, and if we don't get commitment from government, put it on the taxpayer. That's not the case, and so I'm more careful. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I did want to thank Mr. Regier and Mr. Schmidt for giving a more complete picture of what the the overall integration of a higher order of transit in the region would entail. I also understand and appreciate that, and I've spoken to the fact that sometimes government programs and upper levels do change, but this region's always been in the forefront of taking advantage of new funding or changed funding programs that come in through the federal and provincial governments. And I can also appreciate that, you know, that's part of the ongoing work that municipalities have in order to ensure that the projects line up with potential funding that's coming forward, or being able to adapt to changes to an actual program. And I think indeed that's what we talked to about even the King Victoria Transit Station. And that was due in part because of the changes in how Phase 1 LRT was being funded. So I really appreciate it. I think it's important. I think there's more knowledge around this table than perhaps the general public on how these projects roll out. And as I said, in Cambridge, we know that the anticipation for Phase 2 will be that it's not interrupted because of any other huge projects in the region, because there has been that ongoing issue that Phase 1 went ahead without Phase 2 in Cambridge, and that they're paying for something they don't necessarily get or use. I think that Chair Redmond's correct, that I think that ongoing communication with our public is essential in this role in order for us to commit today to what's being asked for, which is the application project, or the application for this funding. So I just wanted to confirm again that even if we move ahead today with the application, that's not going to necessarily interfere with higher order transit in Cambridge. I also understand, I'm very excited by the feasibility study for the GO train link between Cambridge and Guelph, that we could connect to the coming all-day two-way GO on the Kitchener line. And I also understand that you can't really apply for funding yet, and that's really the question of clarification I'm asking now, is that we can't apply for funding for either LRT Phase 2 right now, or a potential higher order transit station in Cambridge until we have the plans in place to go ahead. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that to be correct. Looking to my colleagues, Mr. Regier and Schmidt, to see if they feel otherwise.
Madam Chair, I agree. We need to get the EA done and the business case done in order to start getting funding for Phase 2.
That's fantastic. We'll be there with you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I have no other questions. However, I do have questions of Councillors Jowett and Kiefer. You're on the agenda as the mover and seconder of this motion, and I'm wondering whether you're comfortable with that. Councillor Jowett, are you all right moving this?
Well, to be honest, there's so much trepidation from our community. I mean, I'm supportive of the growth in the community, but I think the recipients would probably be better positioned.
I'd be happy to support it. Move it.
I'll second it.
That's good, Councillor Kiefer?
Yeah, that's fine with me. It's great to see the enthusiasm.
Okay, so we have the motion moved by Councillor Laurent, seconded by Councillor Vrbanovic. Please use your yes and no buttons to vote. And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Good discussion. We are now on to the update, item 9.1, update on Region of Waterloo Children's Centers transition and system planning information. And we do have a staff presentation from Barb Cardo, I believe.
Hi.
Thanks for hanging in there, Barb.
Yeah, all right. And if I could just confirm that you can see the slide.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So, I guess it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. My presentation today is a follow-up to Council's decision in December to enhance the region's childcare service manager role and transition out of the direct operation of our 5 regionally operated children's centers. The final day of care for the 4 standalone centers, so that's Cambridge, Christopher, Edith McIntosh, and Kinsman, will be on Friday, September the 3rd, 2021. And there's 57 children enrolled in those centers who need to transition to new child care programs. And the children's center supervisors are providing the supports to all those families to help them find new child care arrangements, working together with community operators and planning for smooth transitions. The final center that will be making a transition will be the Elmira Children's Centers, which is located in Riverside Public School in Elmira. Conversations about transitioning the operations for Elmira are underway between the region, the Waterloo Region District School Board, and the Ministry of Education. And we will provide an update to Council as soon as more information becomes available. As a result of the Children's Center's transition, there will be provincial funding available for reinvestment in the local childcare system. So today I'm going to share more information about the planning work to support this reinvestment and to support strengthening the local childcare system. So we know that there are things about the child care system that are not working well for families. And through various engagements that we have had with parents, we've heard about the following experiences. Parents who apply for child care when they first find out they're pregnant and still are not able to secure a space in time for when they need child care. Parents who don't know about joining the wait list early and then get a childcare arrangement really isn't what they were hoping for or need. Parents who shift their work hours or have a family member care for their child a day or 2 a week because they need that to reduce their costs because otherwise they can't afford the childcare. Parents who use more than one program and then find that the programs are very different in terms of quality. And then there was the parents with less choice or limited options because of where they live in the region. And these are just some examples of some of the challenges that parents have. The really good news is that as the service system manager for early years and childcare, the region of Waterloo has the opportunity to develop policies and funding strategies that can make a difference in these experiences of parents and children and can improve the inequities that we know exist, particularly for Indigenous, racialized, and other marginalized families. To identify key priorities for change and to develop strategies to guide or to make our changes, Children's Services is guided by our locally created system plan. The system plan is really central to our work and is the key way that we hear from the community about priorities for childcare in Waterloo Region, including our priorities for funding investment. We're currently working on updating our local system plan, and the broad priorities are based on existing community feedback and provincial direction and will be related to those key opportunities for system change that I just mentioned. So as a reminder, that was affordability, access, equity and inclusion, and quality, as has been identified by parents in past engagements. Children's Services continues to work with the community on all of these priorities. And today I'm going to provide you with some updates specifically on 2 areas where there is additional focused planning and engagement happening in 2021. The specific strategic directions, goals, targets of the new system plan will be developed based on significant stakeholder feedback and an environmental scan. The table on this slide outlines the broad timelines for the development of the new plan, and I will just highlight that we plan to provide an update to Regional Council in June regarding the initial findings of our stakeholder engagement, and then the full system plan will be presented to Council approval in the fall of this year. So the system plan, which is built on engagement and on research, will inform priorities for new investment and revised funding investment, including the provincial funding that's available for reinvestment as a result of the region's children's centers transition. The funding that will be available for reinvestment is approximately $1 million this year, $3.1 million in 2022, while Elmira is still in operation, and a total of up to $4.3 million will be available when the transition of all 5 centers is completed. So in the short term, in 2021, we know that childcare operators are facing significant instability as a result of the pandemic. And so we're going to reinvest the $1 million that we have available this year in stability grants for community childcare operators. And we've already begun those discussions with them. The longer term funding reinvestment priorities will be implemented starting in 2022. These long-term priorities will support Council's priorities, including healthy, safe, and inclusive communities and thriving economies focus areas. The funding priorities will also align with the system plan and respond to stakeholder feedback that we've gathered as part of the system planning process. So in addition to the broad planning and engagement that's supporting the development of the new system plan, there is also a more focused planning and engagement happening in equity and inclusion. We know that the current system doesn't meet the needs of all children or families, and that some families, in fact, are left out of the system altogether. So to complement the system plan, we're doing focused work on equity and inclusion to ensure Children's Services is able to move much more quickly into action. Staff is working with the Region of Waterloo Equity, Inclusion and Human Rights Unit to develop a strategy for engagement with Indigenous and racialized communities and other marginalized families. We're developing a short-term engagement plan, and which will be implemented in the spring. This engagement will be more broad, and the results will inform the system plan priorities and actions, but it will also help us to identify on potential opportunities that could be implemented more immediately rather than waiting for the system plan to be approved. Immediately following our short-term process of engagement, we will move into a long-term engagement plan, and that's going to begin in the summer. This will be focused on the deep work of removing childcare system barriers and inequities. Children's Services is also working with the Equity and Inclusion and Human Rights Unit to conduct an environmental scan. And through that, we're reviewing available data to understand the differences in service access for different families in the region. And where our existing data doesn't support understanding system gaps for Indigenous, racialized, and marginalized families, we're going to be looking at how we can change our data collection practices to support this in the future. And frankly, we've already picked up on some places where that data collection can be improved. The other key area of our focused engagement and planning in 2021 is around quality improvement. Some parents have shared that they have very different quality experiences in different programs, and we want to enhance the quality supports that are provided for all licensed childcare and early years programs in Waterloo Region. So this will include enhanced training and capacity building, as well as quality measurement and accountability. Again, this work is happening alongside our system planning work to make sure that changes can be made quickly. So as the timeline shows, the system plan, which is going to be released in the fall, will include clear actions and targets related to quality, and the new quality improvement approach will be implemented starting in 2022. So thank you very much for your time today and your interest in Children's Services. We know how important licensed quality childcare is to children and families and to the economy in Waterloo Region. And we know there are things about the current system that really are not working for families. We're very interested to hear more from the community about key priorities for the future to make the system more equitable and responsive to families' needs. And I look forward to sharing updates with you further in the coming months. And that brings me to the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Barb. I do have a few questions lined up. The first one from Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you very much, through the chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Cardo, on the report. One question that came to my mind was regarding parents who are shift workers and how they're supported. I know you certainly talked in depth about supporting Indigenous, marginalized, racialized communities. What about from a work perspective? Shift workers, I think many use home daycare, but perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and how that might, what council might see in that regard.
Sure, that will definitely be a group of parents that we will be really interested in speaking with. And based on our historic look at engagement with the community, that is a group we do hear from. So yes, you're right. Typically, those parents are supported through licensed home childcare, and we really saw that during emergency childcare, where that was actually the first choice of most shift workers, was to engage with the licensed home childcare system. And really, anecdotally, I can say that what parents tell us is that because there's overnight care that might be involved with that, they would prefer their child to be in a home-based environment, and where it's easier for, and it is easier for an operator to provide it in a home-based environment. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. If it comes back to me, I'll get back to it. Did that answer your question, Dave?
That did, Barb, because I was really looking for the fact that that's going to be part of the conversation in 2021 for your team. So thank you very much for that.
And you know what, you reminded me, it is, and what we were reminded of in emergency childcare is just how important licensed home childcare is to our community. And that will be a part of our service system that we want to continue to prop up and support to ensure that it continues to be accessible to families in the region.
Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Through you to Barb. Thanks for the presentation. And you talked a lot about connecting with Indigenous and racialized communities. And I know that in doing will solve or will highlight a lot of problems that are sort of across the whole system. But I wonder if you can give a little more detail on how you plan to engage with not just the racialized and Indigenous communities. You talked about shift workers. I know I had a lot of calls when this was going through from people here who said, you know, we don't feel like we've had enough input. So can you just talk a little bit more about the plan for engaging parents?
I could tell you that the first step of the plan for engaging with all parents, so this is not our focused engagement with Indigenous and racialized and marginalized families, but our first step is we are actually currently working on a broad parent survey that will go out through our platform at the region of Waterloo. And so we're beginning with a broad survey that is really under construction at this time as the first step. And then out of that, we will determine what our next steps will be for engagement. It will very likely include other forms of engagement other than a survey, because we know we cannot reach all families through a survey, and that has its own limitations. But it is currently under construction. And what our survey is going to include postal code and municipalities. And so if there is any underrepresentation, we will look at further focused engagement for how we can reach those other families.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, it'll be important to tap into everyone, people that use home care, and not necessarily people who were just at those 5 daycare centers. So thanks.
Definitely, yes. So there will be a survey that goes out to the broad community that would include all parents in Waterloo region, but we will also be targeting those who are using licensed childcare right now, including licensed home childcare.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Barb, thanks for that information and presentation. And it's a lot of good information. And I'm wondering of a set communication message that we're going to be sending out on a consistent basis as to how we're, laying out these things or implementing these things in terms of, for the public is what I'm getting at. Is there something that in our communications that's going out on a regular basis to the public?
So the report that went forth for today's committee is one of those ways, along with some key messaging that we've developed to support communicating about the work. There will be further communication in June that outlines the results of the stakeholder feedback and the work that we've accomplished at that point. And then there will be a report that goes out along with the system plan in September that will go out to the community.
And Barb, just Madam Chair, if I could just follow up, Barb, is there something that I presume there's something that'll be on the website as well with regards to what's happening?
Yes, yes, absolutely. We're also working with our corporate communications to develop a comprehensive strategy to make sure that there are communications available through the website on our ongoing system planning.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Thanks, Barb, for this overview and update and exactly what we, when we went through the decision process, what we had committed that we were going to follow through with the community and the parents who were anxious about getting additional spaces. I think what it does, it demonstrates our commitment. My question, and I'm really happy to see this $1 million that's been allocated in 2021 for some stability grants. And I'm interested, is that to help centers maybe with rent, wage subsidies? We heard that this was such a challenging time for centers right now with capacity not be nearly at its capacity. So my question is, what will that $1 million be used for?
So it will be done on a grant basis, and we've begun communications with the operators about this already to determine, what are the areas of need that are not being met through either federal or provincial programs that are available to them already. So there are some federal wage subsidy programs as well as provincial rent support programs and small business programs that can help. And so we are working specifically with the centers because every program really has their own unique pressures, and so we're working with them to identify just where are their pressures. Some may be around the amount of sick time that their staff need to take, and because of having to quarantine due to being exposed, or wanting to be able to support parent fees, or replacement of materials due to cleaning, because what they've shared with us is that with the increased cleaning and sanitizing, they find their materials and equipment are wearing out much more quickly than they normally would. And so really what we're looking at is a flexible approach that will allow each center to identify where their pressures are so that we can support them as flexibly as possible so that they can continue to operate.
If I may, just another question, Chair Clark. Thank you for that, Barb. If I remember correctly, during the review process, we said that the current childcare centers were working at 70% capacity. Am I recalling that number correctly?
Yeah, it depends, but anywhere between 50 and 80% capacity.
And is that remaining pretty consistent, or is that changing as COVID continues and continues?
Councillor Erb, I believe it is remaining fairly consistent. Where there's been significant pain has been in the before and after school programs that were required to close during the recent stay-at-home order. But even before and now, that before and after school programs are finding that their enrollments are extremely low. But other than that, the rest of the system is relatively stable at about the same levels.
Well, thanks for that information, and thanks for this work that you're doing, which I think reconfirms our commitment to make sure that we continue to have a stable childcare system in the region. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I just wanted to again thank Ms. Carter's team for a pretty complicated set of circumstances, and no crystal ball is forthcoming, which I think we could all use at this time. And some of my questions have been answered. I'm particularly concerned for those individuals and those individual families that may be shift workers, but also may be caring for a child with a lot of special needs. And in fact, this is deeply personal to them. They don't really want to know about the whole system. They want to know how we are going forward as a region in order to provide the same level of care in a seamless way for their particular child in their care with so many specialized needs. We know that there are agencies going in to care for these children, but these families are in a state of high anxiety because they don't have their answer yet. And even though I understand we'll be updated in around June, for an individual who has to have somebody trained to look after some particularly difficult circumstances and special needs, they need more than a day or two notice in these circumstances. So what assurances do we have as council members that our families under our watch are going to have the same level of care in a timely way where everyone can make the adjustments and get the training that's going to be required for these particular individuals?
So throughout the pandemic, while the centers have been open and while emergency childcare was functioning, all centers who have a contract with the region of Waterloo are required through their service contract to provide inclusive childcare and work closely with the agencies that provide the supports to ensure all children are included. And the two agencies that support our licensed childcare system are KW Habilitation and Kids Ability. And so those both KW Habilitation and Kids Ability have continued to be fully funded to support the child care system to include all children. And if a center has a child who they have concerns about, they can make a referral for a new child, or a parent can self-refer into the special needs resourcing system as well to get the supports that they need for their child. Currently, both Kids Ability and KW Habilitation are working much more virtually, but they still, based on public health requirements, but they still are able to go right into a center where there is hands-on training or support that's needed to ensure a child has everything they need to be included. Children with special needs who are transitioning from a region center to a community program will receive additional supports as well from special needs resourcing to ensure that there's a smooth transition into the new child care program where the child is going to be attending. Does that answer your question, Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, Ms. Cardo, and I think it does. I know that, that's certainly in my background. I was one of those support systems that went into some of these individuals, and I can't underscore enough how difficult sometimes the circumstances are, but also some of the the long-term training and individualized care that these individuals require. And it requires a really healthy lead time for individuals to be trained on these particular individuals. It may be specialized equipment. I will say in the early days when I was a visiting nurse in this community, I had to go into West Park Hospital in Toronto for 4 days of training in order to be able to run the equipment in this individual's home, and that was with a child. So that's why I'm just wanting to ensure that it's on the table in front of us, that there are particular circumstances, particular pieces of equipment that are unfamiliar to any of the providers without that healthy lead time and training to ensure that each and every need of that particular individual is looked after well before the transition actually occurs. And I also just wanted to acknowledge again that I understand that this team really understands that, but also want to reassure the families in Waterloo Region that we will provide that time so that their particular family members with their individual specialized needs will be accommodated each and every time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Ms. Cardo, I just wanted to thank you very much. I know that this got a lot of focus and attention and the budget has passed us, and I heard from very frustrated residents that were wondering when this process was going to come forward. It's very important that we do it right rather than just quickly. An investment in $1 million into our entire childcare system is huge news, and the fact that that's going to increase over the next couple of years. Thank you for undertaking this. And if anything I have learned through this pandemic is that people don't like ambiguity and they don't like uncertainty. So thank you for bringing up some clarity to this process. And I'm assuming that there will be all manner of outreach to parents, families in the system, and parents who have kids that will be entering into the system, how they can input into this process.
Yes, definitely.
That's all the questions I see. I did have one, and I don't know whether you'll be able to answer it, but my understanding is that through the Ministry of Education and partnerships with the school boards, there will be 5 new childcare centres coming online. I wonder whether you know anything about the status of that, whether you know anything about the locations of the centres, and I guess finally, how are the school boards going to be involved if they are in this environmental scan you're doing?
So I don't have the data right in front of me about the timing of the new centers that are coming in. I'm going to see if I can get somebody to get that while I'm speaking, but I can get back to you with that in short order. So that's that question. But yes, you are right. There are 5 new centers being built in new schools across Waterloo Region. Regarding the involvement of the Waterloo Region District School Board and the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, as well as our 2 French language school boards, we are actually close service system partners with all 4 of those large organizations, and we actually work very closely with them in our system planning. And for example, as new centers come into we are part of planning for where new centers will be built together with our school board partners, and with identifying service providers, or helping with their process of identifying which service providers will be working in those centers. And they are absolutely, the operating centers are a part of our system, and as far as the schools are concerned, they consider them as part of their school as well, and take responsibility for that. I have one update here. So Breslau has been approved and is likely opening in late 2021 or early 2022. And I'm just waiting. I can see and 3 other programs are back to the ministry for approval for additional funding, and we're just waiting to hear about them. So, so I can tell you for sure one of them.
That's great. Great. Sandy? Breaking news. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I see no other questions. That item was for information only. There's no motion. Thanks very much, Barb. Information and correspondence, council inquiries and requests for information tracking list is in the report. And we now have our favorite thing, COVID-19 update from Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Kathy Prosh will project my slides. Thank you. All right. Just gonna see if they're. Kathy, are you there? Oops. Is she there? Trying to look at.
Kathy is in the meeting. We're just waiting for her to load things up.
Okay. Thank you. Well, perhaps I can just start with some remarks while she's loading things up. My first slide was really a screenshot of our current epi curve, and it will show that our rates continue to slow. Our current weekly incidence rate is now at approximately 55 cases per 100,000 per week. So our community has made significant gains from our high of over 185 cases per 100,000 per week in early January. I wanted to emphasize, however, that our gains are very precarious, but with our continued commitment to public health measures and a gradual approach to lifting of measures over the next weeks, we can see a way forward for our community. I would like to emphasize that the most important thing for us to remember, however, is that as restrictions are gradually lifted, we must continue to limit our mobility and our non-essential social interactions wherever we can. If you could go to the next slide, Kathy, please. Thank you. Just a little update on something you may have heard about through the media yesterday. As part of a greater collective response to support racialized, low-income, and newcomer communities who are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, health system partners, in collaboration with community organizations and municipal partners, are working on enhancing supports for these communities. Partners are continuing to work together while awaiting a response from the province on our request for Waterloo Region to receive funding from the province's high priority communities strategy. We have learned from other areas of the province that have received such funding that two major components of this strategy are safe isolation sites and enhanced access to testing. Responsibility and funding to lead these initiatives has been given to Ontario Health, working in partnership with local communities, the local public health unit, and local municipalities. In Waterloo Region, public health has moved ahead with securing a safe isolation site with funding, full funding from the federal government. And testing partners have started a pilot for pop-up testing in 2 Kitchener neighborhoods. Local Ontario Health teams, whose members have played an integral part in our community's COVID-19 response from the beginning, are actively discussing how health system partners and local community organizations can continue working together to further support our high-risk communities while we wait for a response from the province. If you could go to the next slide, please. So yesterday, Ontario announced that the provincial emergency declaration will expire today without an extension. Waterloo Region will remain under a stay-at-home order until Tuesday, February the 16th at 12:01 a.m. And at that point is expected to return to the province's COVID-19 response framework, which will be updated with some changes, including a new emergency brake provision where the province can quickly move a region into the lockdown tier if a region experiences a rapid acceleration in COVID transmission, or if the healthcare system becomes overwhelmed. So the province announced adjustments to the framework to support a wider reopening of retail. This change would allow, for example, for 25% capacity in most retail settings, even under the gray lockdown level. Our enforcement partners and legal services will review the new regulations when they are released in order to be able to provide more specifics on what these measures will be. So at this time, we do not yet know what level of the framework Waterloo Region will move to. It will depend on how our overall situation continues to evolve, but we expect to hear next week. In the meantime, we need to continue doing everything we can to continue slowing the spread of COVID-19 and to reduce our rates of transmission as low as possible. The last slide, please. Thanks, Kathy. So the Premier and the Health Minister announced yesterday that the provincial changes do not represent a return to normal. As we learn what level of the framework Waterloo Region will be placed in once the stay-at-home order is lifted, it will be imperative for all of us to continue to follow the public health precautions. They are our best protection against the spread of COVID-19, including the new variants of COVID-19. As I mentioned earlier, it needs to be emphasized that the most important thing we need to do, as restrictions are gradually lifted, is to continue to limit our mobility and our non-essential social interactions. Our situation, like elsewhere in Ontario, remains very precarious, and the variants of concern, in addition to the regular strain, remain a serious risk. We must therefore continue to limit close contact to our immediate household members and stay at home except for essential reasons. We need to continue to reduce the number of new cases and the strain on our health system, which continues to be high at this time. When we were previously in the red zone, provincial data on mobility, including for Waterloo Region, showed that we did not change our mobility patterns, and in fact, increased them before the provincial shutdown. This was followed by a significant surge following the holidays, which led to enhanced shutdown measures, an emergency declaration, and a stay-at-home order. Even with the gradual lifting of restrictions, if we treat these as signs, we no longer have to keep up with our efforts to reduce our mobility and minimize our social interactions. We will no doubt head into a third wave. Together, though, we can slowly start to lift restrictions while keeping transmission rates low. But we can only do this together. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks for the report, Dr. Wong. We have a question from Councillor Jowett.
Yes.
Thanks again, Dr. Wong, for all of the intense effort that you've been putting into this for such a long time now. I'm still so impressed by your empathy and awareness in all of this, and the way that you get your messaging across. And when you share with us that your concern is that we don't want people to become complacent, for example, and you speak to the surge that happened before the shutdown. I hope I'm using the right term. Can you show on the epi curve exactly where that surge was? And then we can share that in key messaging as a diagram that says, look what happened last time. This surge is a direct result of this complacency. Let's not do it again. Could we do something like that?
Yes, we can definitely put a visual together for that. It shows very well on our epi curve. And we're very much like the province. It's very interesting. Across the province, we saw the same phenomenon. People increased their mobility just before the shutdown, and then the peak happened a couple of weeks later. So very concordant. We can do that for you. We'll take that back. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Councillor Shantz.
My picture is flipped just as I'm clicking the unmute button, and I'm in the wrong spot. Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Wong, for also for me, for all the work that you do. This has been a crazy year for you, and you've just handled it so very well. Two questions one that I've asked in other forums, but I just want to ask it again, and that's about the vaccine rollout, and perhaps it's one for Deputy Hilton, but will we be looking at pop-up vaccine places, I guess, in the townships?
Yeah, the task force will be releasing more information soon. Definitely one of the major considerations in our plan to scale up, vaccine clinics is the idea of making it accessible for, our various areas in our region. And so that's actually a key characteristic of our plan that might be different from, some other areas where they're really focusing on just a small number of large physical sites. We do have some physical sites, but we also want to make sure that we have a lot of accessible sites. So I know that more information will be released soon, and so I'll maybe leave it to Deputy Hilton to provide that update later. But it is a key consideration of our plan.
Thank you. It's very important, especially for phase 2 or stage 2 in the townships with the older seniors. I say older because I fit the senior category, and I still have trouble getting myself in there sometimes. But that aren't as mobile or don't want to come into the city. So I think it'll be very important for them. So thank you for that. And my other question is, I guess around talking about mobility and social interactions as we open up, and I guess the messaging of maintaining minimal interactions, I guess, is I understand that's an important message, but I think we also, as we open up, need to have a message of how we can have some of those interactions safely. So I don't know if you want to speak to that right now, but I think that'll be important messaging as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Councillor Shantz. Thanks. Yes, even the province recognizes this is a challenging message, because at the same time that you are lifting restrictions and allowing more settings to open, you are still saying to people, that they should try to minimize going out and minimize social interactions with others unless they're absolutely necessary. So it is a challenging message, and it's based on the fact that we need to continue to be very cautious and prudent as we open up. We want to try and open up in order to help our economy, help our businesses, but at the same time, we know from other jurisdictions that if we just open up without socially still being very limited in terms of our interactions and our mobility, we will bounce right back up. We've seen that elsewhere, and so we have no reason to believe it would be different for us here in Canada. In addition, we've also seen that in those other areas, once they again enacted very strong measures of the social type designed to limit mobility and interactions, they were able to bring the rates back under control. So it is a very delicate balance and a very challenging one, because you're wanting to try to loosen restrictions at the same time as trying to keep rates low. It can be done, but what it does require is for us to continue to try, each of us individually, to reduce our interactions and to reduce our mobility where we can.
Councillor Vanovic?
Thank you very much, and thanks, Dr. Wong, for your and the team's great ongoing leadership on what has proven to be something that, in the beginning, I think we all hoped was maybe only going to be a few weeks, and now we're almost into a year on the whole thing. I have three questions. The first one. Actually, two questions and a comment. The first one actually has to do with the issue of the different rates of opening up, which we know makes sense on one end because the numbers in the GTHA are higher, and so the regions that they're talking about holding back on for an extra week, I think makes sense. The challenge is, as we know last time. And when we looked at some of the cell data, people start coming from those areas into our areas to shop, socialize, whatever. And I'm just wondering if that's a topic of conversation that you've had with the provincial table. I know there's a lot of economic activity between the Toronto-Waterloo Region corridor, and we don't want to necessarily stymie that. But I think we can potentially, look at, are there ways of limiting, whether it's restaurants or small business activity, in our area, or at the very least, maybe, having people sign in like we do for restaurants at some of our independent stores and so on, so that people can, if there is any issue of a case or an outbreak, you have a contact list to help. Has there been any discussion around that? And if not, is it something that we should be advocating for with the province?
Yeah, that's an excellent question again. There has been a lot of discussion around that. It's been recognized that previously when we tried to do it really, health unit area by health unit area, it was very challenging because you would have a bit of a patchwork, right, of different colors. Across, Ontario. So there's been more of an effort to try to at least make it a bit broader. So, for example, the 3 GTA health units with the highest rates, Toronto, Peel, and York, would remain under the stay-at-home order for another week versus all the other ones, as opposed to more of a patchwork that's happened before. So there is a greater effort to try to make it more consistent over a larger area if possible. The discussion about, you know, how to encourage people to stay within their areas, or at least not travel from an area with higher rates at one time to an area with lower rates, is a very difficult challenge to address, because there's really no mechanism, you know, to force people to not move, because as you noted, sometimes they have to move for essential reasons, for example, work, and other times it's not essential, but it's hard to know. And then when you start to get into, well, is there a way to encourage that, like you mentioned, by things like people signing in, then it gets to issues related to, you know, the work for the businesses to do that, whether it's, you know, actually we are allowed to take down information for which we don't have a purpose for, like in health, for health facilities, we're very limited on what we can collect. We have to really demonstrate that it would be of significant, you know, it would be of a health benefit, a clear health benefit. So there have been some, you know, rules put in under the provincial regulations, and even under some of the medical officer of health orders or directions I provided, so that people can put their contact information down, for example, when they enter a premise, so that we can contact them for, you know, in case there's a case, but not to say, well, I, you know, in this region or not in this region, because it, you know, wouldn't, well, in terms of collecting data, it would have to, you'd have to have a public health purpose for it, beyond their contact info, so a way to contact them. So it might be something that, from a business perspective, the business community may want to look at, to try to, you know, encourage, you know, people to stay within their boundaries. But it would be very hard to legislate, is what I understand. The other thing is, when we have heard of instances of, you know, travel maybe that's been encouraged by agencies that we can, you know, speak to, we have gone and spoken to those agencies to try to limit that. So, for example, when we heard the Ministry of Transportation was sort of encouraging interregional travel for driving tests, we reached out to the Ministry of Transportation and said, could you please stop this, because this is not, you know, what's helpful, and it's not recommended. And they, after a while, they did. So I think, you know, that's one of the things we can continue to do, is if we see this type of movement, and we can clearly identify who we can speak to in order to try to discourage it or have it stop, we can, you know, staff can continue to do that as well.
Well, yeah, and I think that's one we need to keep an eye on, and perhaps even, you know, however we accessed that data last time, whether it was through Environics or another company, we should probably try to stay on top of it, so that if we see a quick flow of people, we can actually start our advocacy very quickly with the province. Mm-hmm. The second question I have is one that came up actually at our pandemic control group meeting, and it's the issue of masking. And I know, you know, I know that Canada's position since November from Dr. Tam and others has been to move to the 3-layer mask, with one of those layers being a filtered layer. We also know that in recent weeks, as a result of the situation with the variants, Germany, Austria, France, and others have moved away from cloth masks to with that. Have you heard anything yet from your colleagues federally or provincially on this, or if not, can you bring something back to us, either here or at Public Health or Pandemic Control Group, or a mixture of all of those on that issue? so that we can, this is one where perhaps we may want to get ahead of the curve on, depending on the medical advice, and perhaps be a leader and not a follower on. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Thanks for the question. The province, has recently stated that the recommendation continues to be that people have at least the recommended cloth masks, the 3-layer masks, as you mentioned. People can choose to increase the type of go up to a higher level of masks if they'd like on a personal level. But what the province is continuing to recommend is people have at least a cloth mask, preferably 3 layers, and that it's quite important that people pay attention to the fit of the mask to make sure that it fits snugly, that it fits well. In other words, it doesn't leave gaps where it meets the face, as well as being comfortable enough so people can continue to wear it for long periods of time. And it's felt that a lot of times, people may not be wearing their masks properly. And so, a key thing that people can do is continue to pay attention to how their mask fits and ensure that it's comfortable for long-term wearing. The federal expert bodies and provincial ones that are examining this particular issue have let us know that they're continuing to pay close attention to the evidence that's coming out. And, we'll continue to monitor at local level, of course, what comes out from the expert bodies that have been charged with looking at this. I think the takeaway would be it would be important to reinforce that as much as possible, people should have the 3-layer masks. At a minimum, they can choose to go up to a medical grade if they'd like, but at a minimum, 3-layer mask. The recommendations for healthcare workers continue to be the same, and that this will continue to be looked at by federal and provincial experts. And we'd be happy to report back when there's some more information on that.
Okay, and so I look forward to hearing more from you on this issue and maybe bringing to us some of the research from those other countries. Like I say, I personally would not be averse to leading on this. This region is known to be barn raisers and leaders on things, and this may be one where we actually lead and have the rest of the province come along with us on it, if it makes sense. And so I'll leave that with you. The last point that I was just going to make is just a thank you for the work that's being done that you spoke of in your presentation with our socioeconomically disadvantaged communities with respect to the testing. We're happy to provide facilities that can be used for that in that partnership, and encouraged to hear that as a pilot, we'll see if it's working well, looking to expand it elsewhere in the region.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I just had a couple of questions, and it may not be appropriate for Dr. Wong, but there's still some concerns coming in from the community to myself about the rollout of the vaccine. And just wondering if you could very quickly again reiterate the populations that the province has identified with the first rollout. And secondly, I'll just ask it at the same time, those individuals are worried for our frontline workers to make sure that they get their second vaccine, or even their first and second vaccine. And is there a place where they can find this information on the dashboard to sort of more closely identify what populations and where you're at with the vaccinations are in this priority population? on the dashboard? How do they get that information is a simpler way to put it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGarry. So yes, there is a web page that exists on the regional website, which is COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force webpage, and basically information about the vaccine rollout is all centered there. And with regards to your question about who is in the first phase, they include groups such as the highest risk seniors congregate settings. So the highest risk congregate settings would be long-term care homes as defined by the Ministry of Long-Term Care. They would also be the higher risk type retirement residences, which are the retirement homes as defined by the Retirement Homes Regulatory Authority. So those ones would be the highest risk seniors congregate settings. And they are the ones right now that have been prioritized and for which we have sufficient vaccine. So because of the shortage of Pfizer, that we're currently experiencing, the residents of those homes are the highest priority. And then after those residents, once we have a bit better supply, which we hope to have, and the province is projecting we will have in the second half of February, then we can continue to immunize the staff and the essential caregivers of those residents in the highest risk homes, long-term care, high risk retirement homes. And then we can move on to other groups that the province has named, and we expect they'll give further direction on prioritization among these groups soon, but they include high-risk healthcare workers. They include chronic home care residents, and they also include urban indigenous populations. So even though there has been a Pfizer shortage, and it's been very challenging for all areas in Ontario to manage, through the excellent inventory management that has been done by folks in the task force, we are able to, according to plan, ensure that all those who have received their first dose, so all residents as well as healthcare providers, are able to receive their second doses within the recommended time frame. So originally, this is my last point, sorry for being a bit long, we wanted to make sure that the residents would have their doses between 21 and 27 days. That hasn't changed, and we're still on target to meet that. For the non-residents, the province has put out that it's acceptable to go up to 42 days. And what we have targeted here is about 35 days, just to try to make sure we have a bit of a buffer. And so some people have had to have their appointments rescheduled from 28 days to, say 35 days. But with the inventory management we've done, we should be able to get everyone's second doses within those 35 days. So there's some buffer built in as well. So for example, we had planned 21 days for the residents. So if there is some slight vaccine delay issue, we can go up to 27. So things like that have helped us ensure that even with the supply issues, we're able to manage and deliver second doses within the acceptable timeframes. So it is very challenging, and I understand right now it is frustrating for people because it's a very, very slow start. But what I like to say is the growth in the vaccine supply, as well as our ability to deliver it, will be more like an exponential curve rather than a linear curve. We have supply challenges at first. That's why things have really slowed down in terms of distribution, but we are working hard behind the scenes so that once we get more supply, which we expect to come as of March, and going into April, we were able to ramp up the clinics to be able to deliver the doses that we get in, without delay, and just keep getting them out as fast as we can. So hopefully that helps.
It does a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councillor Jaworski.
Thank you. Just a quick question to Dr. Wong regarding shelter care workers. Received an email from a shelter care worker who unfortunately contracted COVID-19, and he was asking for advocacy with respect to workers and where they might be in the list for receiving vaccines. I wonder if you could provide us an update based on what you might know or have heard on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jaworski. So the prioritization of groups like shelter groups has been done by the province. This is to ensure consistency across the province, and groups like that would receive the vaccine in 2. So phase 1 can be considered, the highest risk residents. Phase 2, high risk populations, and then phase 3 would be the general public. So they are still prioritized. However, they're prioritized in phase 2 at the moment, and the key underlying rationale for prioritization does have to do with the expected benefit of the vaccine and who's most at risk. So what we know from the vaccine trials that have happened is that the vaccine is effective at preventing serious outcomes and especially death. What we don't have evidence for at this time is the vaccine is actually effective at preventing asymptomatic infection, nor transmission. So that is why the priority is immunizing those most at risk of dying. And that is clearly very age dependent. And very dependent on whether the seniors are living in a high-risk congregate setting or not, rather than, for example, immunizing those around them, because there isn't that evidence right now that it's effective to prevent transmission. So that's one of the reasons why the groups have been prioritized in that order. We do know it's an important population. Both the shelter population as well as those who serve them, and they are in phase 2 among higher priority groups in the general population, but they are currently prioritized after phase 1 residents, the groups that I previously mentioned, and it really only has to do with a supply issue, because we don't expect supply to be significant before really phase 2.
Well, there's always more to know, and I'm glad that you know it. Thank you, Dr. Wong.
Thank you.
Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. I was watching the news and a report on the new Brazilian strain as well as the African strain.
South African,
And,
yes.
Yeah, he was reporting that the vaccine doesn't work on these.
Yeah, what we've seen is that right now we don't. The most prevalent variant in Canada and in Ontario is the UK variant, and we don't have any evidence that the vaccines that we have approved right now, which are Pfizer and Moderna, are any less effective for the UK variant. So that's good. We have to continue to monitor that, right? But so far, so good. You're correct that we have very recently over the weekend detected first case of the Brazilian strain. I shouldn't really call it that, but I can't remember the technical name right now. But yeah, it was detected in Toronto. Now that's the one that was associated with news reports out of South Africa. Sorry, it's not the Brazilian. I'm sorry, it's the South African. I'm sorry, it's my fault. The South African strain, which was also recently detected. Now that's the one that's been associated with reports out of South Africa of lower efficacy with AstraZeneca. So we don't have AstraZeneca yet. Hasn't been approved in Canada yet, but there were news reports about that. And I know that the federal and the provincial vaccine experts are looking into those studies. Apparently there's going to be a study published. It hasn't been published yet. And so it needs to be published, and, the data has to be out there for other scientists to look at. But they're on top of it, and they're waiting for that information. Right now it's just been news reports to come out and to examine that and to determine what implications that may have for vaccines like the AstraZeneca one that we expect may be approved in Canada soon. So you're correct. So it's something to monitor, the efficacy of the current vaccines, and each of them can have different efficacy against different strains. So it gets a little complex. But right now with the vaccines we have, we don't have evidence they're not effective against the new strains, and we'll continue to monitor.
Thank you.
All right. I see no other questions of Dr. Wong. There was a reference to Deputy Hilton presenting. Is that going to happen now, or is that some future presentation?
I think it's a future one. I think this one was just scheduled a verbal update.
Yeah, there's nothing on the agenda. It just was mentioned a couple times, so I didn't want to miss it. Thank you very much. Always extremely informative. Folks, we have one more item on open, and I am going to suggest that we plow through that and then take a 15-minute break before we go into closed. Oh, I see Chair Redmond's hand up.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Just to let everybody know that our community update on Friday at 11:30 always includes both Dr. Wong and Deputy Hilton. So anybody that wants to get the latest update should feel free to tune into that.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That was an information only. We now have introduction of a notice of motion. Councillor Erb, would you like to speak to that?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Chair Clark. Along with some residents of Erbsville and staff at the region, we've been in conversation for over a year regarding this intersection at Conservation Drive and Erbsville Road. And residents have been asking for a four-way stop, and regional staff have responded with numerous measures to help mitigate any accidents at this intersection. The intersection has some significant site challenges, especially if you're westbound on Conservation Drive and want to turn north or south and needing to inch past the stop bar at the stop sign. And this notice was originally intended to request staff to install a four-way stop as soon as possible. However, in conversation with staff, they asked for an opportunity to come back with a report on the challenges of the intersection, to which Councillor Strickland, who is the seconder, and I agreed to. There was a serious accident at this intersection in January, which resulted in 3 people being hospitalized and the requiring the jaws of life to remove someone from their car. And I know for everyone, including staff, the concern is safety for everyone who uses this intersection. However, after the most recent accident, I think we may need to make a decision, try and significantly reduce any potential for more personal injury associated with this intersection. Conservation Drive, which is east of Erbsville Road and the intersection, is scheduled for reconstruction, which is intended to coincide with the new residential development on Conservation Drive. However, the development is currently on hold because of an appeal to LPAC. And I understand that when the construction of Conservation Drive takes place, maybe some consideration given to a roundabout at that intersection, but that may be years away. And so I personally feel we need to find a solution now. And for me, a four-way stop has some merit. However, I'm willing to wait for staff to report back to the council. And rumor has it that the mayor of Erbsville would also support this recommendation.
Is he seconding, or should I go to Councillor Strickland?
That's it.
Councillor Strickland, since you're the second, I'll go to you next.
Yes, and I really appreciate Councillor Erb's comment with respect to the mayor of Erbsville. And just for everyone watching, Jim Erb did not have to declare a conflict. He's just joking about that. So anyways, I just, this settlement area, since it became part of the city of Waterloo a number of years ago, Erbsville, as we affectionately know it, has had lots of challenges with the speed through that small community over a number of years. And I've been, involved with that community and residents over a period of time, and work with staff, and we put on lane markings, and we put out some bollards. And then last year, for some reason, the bollards didn't happen and weren't installed. And at the intersection itself, a Conservation Drive and Erbsville Road, it was further complicated. A number of years ago, over 10 years ago, I would say, by the new church that was put into place along Conservation Drive, and the traffic volume. Like, that church has a capacity of over 1,000, I think, and it's quite a place of worship if you ever get a chance to visit Creekside Bible, I think it's called. But anyways, I support this direction. I'm happy to have staff come back and take a look at it. And if you've ever had to drive that intersection and try to get out of Conservation Drive onto Erbsville, you'll know exactly what Jim and I and Councillor Jaworski are referring to. So happy to have staff come back with a report, but something seriously needs to be done. And I think it's a four-way stop, but happy to hear what staff has to say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just to note that this is not a matter we're debating today. This is just a notice of motion to come to the February 17th council agenda.
Thank you. I'm just getting ready for the debate, Madam Chair.
You are, yes. So Councillor Jaworski, is there something you'd like to contribute that isn't part of the debate?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so there's just for clarity for staff to give thought to the certainly one of the properties adjacent to the intersection, I think Councillor Erb or Councillor Strickland might have mentioned, has an old outbuilding that's literally adjacent to the roadway. So I'd just like to highlight to staff that when this does come up for debate, I know that warrants are often what we talk about. However, I'm not sure warrants talk about a building that's literally at the edge of the intersection. I think this is a key impediment. And so just when this does come up for debate, I want to highlight to staff that I will be asking questions about the outbuildings, the intersection, with respect to warrants if they are included in that. So thank you.
Councillor Schatz.
Thank you. I use that intersection fairly frequently if I'm heading to the west side of Waterloo at all, and I'm happy to have staff take a look at it. I think it needs to be looked at.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, Chair Clark. I guess don't we get an accident report every once in a while? Is this on there, or is there a way to be able to stack it up against some of those we've been looking at for a while? Like, I agree, we're trying to be responsive to the growth of our community, but I'd kind of like to know where we sit on the accident reports. And I know we only it seems like every 5 years, and all the new community infrastructure doesn't make it onto that list right away. And sometimes we're a bit late in catching some of these things. It's just because of the reporting mechanism. That's for you, Stephen.
Perhaps we can get staff to include that information in the report. Councillor Foxton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in Councillor Jallett's comment, sometimes we can't compare these roads to a road like Erbsville Road because the volume and the number of lanes and everything else create a hazard. That doesn't mean it isn't a hazard. The rural roads come across unique situations because maybe there's not as many vehicles at a given time. There is greater speed. We had one little side road. The police came out and it's a 60 kilometer an hour. The average car was doing 120. And they clocked, I think, 50 cars within a 2-hour period doing 120. That's what the rural areas are putting up with. And also, they don't seem to want to slow down in little settlement areas. They think that they don't have to because they'll be through it before they get the brakes on. So sometimes comparing won't help us. I just wanted to make that comment. I understand where you're coming from, but it may not have the accidents, doesn't mean it's safe.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. I do have what I think is a friendly amendment to suggest, but I think I can do that on the 17th. Chair Redmond.
So just to confirm, Chair Clark, that's when this report will be coming back to council.
Yes. Is that the appropriate time?
Yes, I think it is, because it's not a new issue. And I would just like to ask chair to chair, are you glad we're not debating it now?
I really need to go to the bathroom. All right, that was for information. Thank you very much. I look forward to when we actually get to discuss this. Our next meeting is March 9th, and we're now ready to adjourn. We need a vote to adjourn the meeting, and I have that moved by Councillor Lorentz and seconded by Councillor McGarry. Please use your yes or no buttons.
And then we're going into closed after a 15-minute break?
Yes, that's what I'd like to suggest. 15-minute break, which will bring us back at 1 o'clock exactly. And that's unanimous. See you in 15.